everyone, welcome back. I'm Radish, and today is our second of a series of 3 videos where I'll be reviewing the gear that I used on my 2020 thru hike of the Pacific Crest Trail. So in this video, we'll be covering my pack, my clothing, and my electronics. If you missed the first video of my gear review, you can check it out up here, but that one's going to cover my sleep and my cook systems. Now, all the gear that I'll be talking about today is listed in detail on my lighter pack page, which you can find in the description of this video below. So feel free to check that out. It has some more details that I'm not going over in this video. So let's start off talking about the major piece of gear today, which was my pack. So I used Zpacks Arc Haul. Oh my God, sorry, my cat is trying to eat my camera setup. This is Zara, everybody. So, what was I saying? Oh yeah, the pack that I used was Zpacks Arc Haul. It's a 62 liter ultralight backpack. So I have a pretty complicated relationship with this pack after the trail, honestly. So I guess I'll start off talking about the things I liked about it, and then we can talk about the issues that I had with it. But I really liked the innovative design of it. I thought it was a really cool take on a pack where it could incorporate some of the good support and suspension features that Osprey packs have with the arc system to pull it away from your back, which was awesome, especially in the desert. I could get some airflow between my back and the pack so I didn't get too overheated. I also really like just like the simplistic design of the roll top pack. It was just one giant compartment with a mesh pocket on the outside. I don't like a lot of straps, accessories, pockets, and frills like that on my backpack. I like to keep everything very simple, neat, organized, and simple. I think I said that twice, which means I really like keeping things simple. The pack is also waterproof, which I really like. It's seam sealed and everything. So in the rain, I just had to put my sleeping bag in a trash compactor, but everything else I could leave in my bag and it would be totally fine. The trash compactor is really just a backup waterproofing system, but that was really convenient that I didn't have to arrange things when it looked like it was going to start raining. So now let's talk about the issues that I ended up having with the pack. And I'd say there were 3 main issues. The first of which is going back to that waterproofing. So all the seam tape that they put on the inside of the pack started to wear off. Some of it just like slid down the pack, like it was like being pushed down. It was probably just me pulling in and taking out gear, putting it back in my pack repeatedly for 6 months. I kind of hoped that the pack would last at least 6 months, but the seam sealant definitely did not. Granted, you could always go to a shop and get seam sealant and repair that yourself. I just never ended up doing that, but because of that, my pack started to wet out probably somewhere in the center of Oregon, and so from Central Oregon northwards, it never was a waterproof pack for me. So I think going forward, I'm going to just buy a seam sealant and redo the inner liner of it, and then it should be good to go because the material itself is still structurally sound. But the second issue I had with it was the shoulder straps. So for some reason, the main line that they have going down the shoulder over like the pad itself is really, really thin. So it concentrates the entire load of your pack on like a ½ inch surface area on your shoulders. And I found that it would just dig and dig and dig into my shoulders. And by the time I hit Northern California, it was really unbearable. Like I would have days where I couldn't put it on my shoulders. I would literally like move the straps off of my shoulders for hours at a time just because it was so painful. So I ended up getting the extra cushions that Zpacks sells for like 10 bucks that go under it. That wasn't enough for me. Those flattened out pretty quickly, honestly. So I found a sit pad, just like a closed cell foam pad in a hiker box that I was able to cut up into small strips and kind of like zip tie underneath my shoulder pads, which definitely improved the experience a lot. It still was a little bit painful, especially on longer carries. My shoulders just kind of got bruised right here, especially around like the collarbone area. I would hope in the future that Zpacks would kind of widen that strap a little bit. The weight savings are going to be totally negligible, and it's really going to help, I think, kind of spread out that force so the pressure just isn't so intense on your shoulders. Then again, I honestly didn't meet a single thru hiker who didn't have shoulder pain right here around Northern California and onwards. It seemed like no matter what pack people had, they still were in a lot of pain in their shoulders. So it might not be totally Zpacks' fault. It could just be that's what happens when you wear a heavy pack every single day for 6 months in a row. But I think the bigger issue that I ended up having with the Zpacks Arc Haul pack was the arc suspension system itself. So down by my hips, where the bottom of those carbon rods ended up coming into contact with my body, I ran into a couple of issues. Number one, it was causing, like, every step I take, it would bounce into my flesh, like right around like my hip area, right above my butt, and it ended up causing like some like deep pain. I think it's nerve damage or something, because I've never felt a pain like that before. Anytime I put on that pack, I feel this sharp, like, piercing pain in my left hip, and not when I wear any other packs. So I don't know exactly what it is, but it seems to me like the arc system on that fiber, or on that carbon rod, kind of like arcs all of your load into the lower back, and every step you take, it kind of like swings the tip of that rod into your skin. So it was really painful for me, honestly. That is my biggest issue that I had with the pack, because there's no fixing it. I tried kind of different degrees of like bending that rod, and I found keeping it flat was the least painful for me. But then again, you lose the function of the arc system. So I don't have a good answer for that, honestly. And because of that reason, I'm considering going with a different pack into the future, but I'll get to that in a minute. The other issue that I had with that arc system is that one of the carbon poles actually stabbed through the bottom pocket that kept it in the backpack. So the pole itself would just slide out, and my pack became a frameless pack from the Oregon NorCal border all the way up to Canada. I contacted Zpacks, and they were able to work with me. They needed me to send in a pack so that they could do the repairs. They weren't just going to send me a free pack, which is totally fine, but I was also on a thru hike, so I kind of needed my pack. So I had to kind of use my pack as like a frameless pack for almost half of the thru hike, which was not the most comfortable because I don't have a base weight low enough to have a frameless pack. I need that frame to kind of even out my load. I was able to kind of use Leukotape to tape the poles in place, but they definitely did not work as intended because there was all that damage to the structure of the bag. So at the end of the trip, I mailed my pack into Zpacks, and they were able to repair that. It looks almost good as new, totally for free. So I appreciate the fact that they were able to work with me. It just wasn't super conducive to being on a thru hike where you couldn't get rid of your pack to send it in for repairs. And I hoped that it would have lasted longer than about 1,300 miles, but that's really all I got out of it before that damage happened. So because of all these things going forward, honestly, I'd probably look into a different pack if I were going to do another thru hike. I would look at the ULA circuit myself. A lot of people in my family or other folks that I met on trail use that pack. It's got a lot of the ultralight designs to it, but it's not as like minimalist as the Zpacks pack is. And so because of that, it seemed to stand up a little bit better to the wear and tear of a thru hike. Sorry, my cat's still on my lap. And people didn't seem to have as much pain as I had with that pack. Granted, the Zpacks bag is still a good bag, and I'll use it on shorter hikes, but I don't think I'd use it again on a 6-month-long hike. All right, so the next category of items is going to be clothing. So let's start off with the trail runners that I used. I used the Brooks Cascadia men's 14 model. I love these things. They worked fantastic for me. I used them the entire trail. They would last about 600 miles for me. I wouldn't recommend using them any longer than that. The first section of trail, I wore them for about 750 miles, which was definitely way too long. I wanted to really see how far I could push them because I didn't want to buy a ton of pair of shoes on the trail. I thought I could kind of save money in that area. Definitely not the way to save money on the trail. Definitely look for other ways to do that because I developed the most painful blister that I've ever had in my entire life. It looked like a scene from Alien except with my heel. And that took like 2 weeks to heal. So I would definitely recommend changing those out around somewhere between 500 and 600 miles. So I ended up going through 5 pairs of shoes, but they worked out fantastic for me once I kind of figured out how long they would last with the abuse that I was putting them through on the PCT. Especially up in the Sierras, like where you're trudging through snow and doing river crossings every single day. Those things wear down quickly, so just keep that in mind. The trail runners are awesome because they're super lightweight, super breathable, and they dry quickly, but they also just don't last nearly as long because that's what they're intended for. Now, one of the main reasons that I chose the Brooks Cascadia in the first place was because I have a narrow foot, and the Brooks Cascadia has a narrow toe box, or at least an average to narrow toe box. I tried the Ultras, which is a super popular trail runner for the PCT, but I honestly felt like I was wearing clown shoes. It was way too wide of a toe box for me. So if you have a wider toe box, I definitely recommend checking out the Ultra Timps or the Topos. Those are both 2 good wide toe box shoes. But if you have a narrow foot, I definitely recommend checking out the Brooks Cascadias like I used. So I also used GooseFeet Gear down socks with 50% overfill. I would only use these at night. I didn't use them all the time. So like Northern California, I didn't use them. The end of the desert, I didn't use them. Oregon, I didn't really use them that much, but almost all of Washington and the first couple 100 miles in the desert and all of the Sierras, I use them every single night. They're one of my favorite pieces of gear. They're so lightweight, yet they make such a difference in keeping you warm at night. So if you're a cold sleeper, I definitely recommend looking into getting a pair of down booties. They're totally worth it. I also had a pair of REI merino wool mid-weight socks that I would use when I would sleep as well. So I would use these either if it wasn't hot enough to need down booties, or if I was wearing down booties, I would put them over top of my sleeping socks so my down booties didn't get gross and I didn't have to wash those. I would still recommend bringing sleeping socks. For me, I, again, sleep cold, so I would almost always wear those at night, but they're not super critical, especially if you do have down boots. Now during the day, I had 2 pairs of darn tough 1/4 inch hiker socks, and I by far and away recommend this brand. I'm sure a lot of y'all have heard good things about darn tough socks, and it's true. They're super comfortable. They will definitely still get like crusty and gross, but that's just what happens when you wear the same pair of socks for 5 days in a row in like desert sand and volcanic ash and in snow. So I did carry 2 pairs, and I would still carry 2 pairs in the future so that you can wear one for a couple days, kind of rinse it out, wash it out, let it hang on the back of your pack and switch pairs. I did develop a couple holes in the pair of socks, but I was able to use the darn tough warranty and trade them in at a small gear shop in the town of Mount Shasta for a total fresh pair of socks. So honestly, that deal alone makes the darn tough socks worth it to me because I could get a fresh pair of socks anytime I went into town for free pretty much. And I ended up using that warranty, I think 3 or 4 times, just because honestly at night, sometimes like deer would come and eat holes in my socks because they like the salt on them. So if I left my socks outside of my tent, I would usually wake up to find holes in them. So I swap them out every now and then, but I would totally recommend darn tough socks in the future. I picked up a pair of waterproof socks when I got to Kennedy Meadows South for the upcoming Sierras. I had experienced enough trudging through the snow and all the constantly wet and near frostbitten feet that come with that experience, and I didn't want that for the entirety of the Sierras. They worked really well. They were pretty waterproof unless you were fording a river where the water could actually go in over the top of the sock. But for the most part, they just added a lot of insulation and kept my feet a lot warmer when I was postoling through the snow. And I still use them now, and I will in the future for any snow activities. Next up, I used Dirty Girl Gaiters. So these are just lightweight gaiters that you can clip onto your trail runners to try to keep the sand and volcanic ash out of your shoes. They honestly didn't work that well for me. I think it's because I had the Brooks Cascadia shoes and they just are almost completely mesh on the toe. So even though the gaiter covers like the tongue of the shoe and the laces so nothing can get in there, because the rest of the shoe is still like mesh and really airy, stuff still got into my shoe anyway. So they didn't really help me, and I ended up sending them home about halfway through the desert, I believe. I probably wouldn't use them in the future myself unless I got a different type of shoe that didn't have all the mesh in the toe box. So I know a lot of pairs of like Ultras or Topos don't have that mesh, and so I think they'd be a lot more effective with a shoe like that rather than with the Brooks Cascadia. They're a good product, they just didn't work for the shoes that I had with me. The underwear that I used was the ExOfficio men's boxers. These underwear were so comfortable. I even use them back in the real world. They are super quick drying, really easy to maintain on trail, and super comfortable. I never had any chafe or anything like that. So I highly recommend those to anyone, honestly. The shape of those boxers can work for anyone. The base layers that I used were the REI Merino Wool Midweight Base Layer Set, both a long pant and the quarter zip top. I really enjoyed both of them. They weren't the lightest weight version out on the market, but they were super affordable and they did their job. They kept me warm, they were super comfortable, and I'll be using them on future trails. The pants that I used were the CoalaTree Trailhead Slim Fit pants. I love these pants. They have a tie off around the waist and both of the ankles. I think they fit really nicely, are super comfortable. It's a soft shell pant with a little bit of water resistance on it. They will wet out if you're hiking in continuous rain, but if there's a small sprinkling, they pretty much bead up and roll off, which is really, really nice. I use those pants for rock climbing back home, but I thought they would be good for the trail, and they definitely were super nice in the first couple of weeks in the desert when it was super cold and super windy. They blocked off a lot of that wind, and again, the like slight rain and snow was able to beat up and roll off of my pants. I kept them with me for the whole trail, and I definitely didn't need to though. After the winter weather kind of subsided and I got into like mid-April, I didn't really need pants for the rest of the trail. On days where it was a little bit colder, like especially in the Sierras when I woke up early to do some of the mountain passes, honestly, I would have been fine wearing my base layers, my base layer pants with my shorts over top of it. I think that would have been enough for me. So in the future, I'll only be carrying those pants if I'm doing A, climbing, or B, if it's going to be kind of winter or at least shoulder season conditions. Otherwise, honestly, pants aren't necessary. I hike in shorts every single day, and again, if it's chilly, just put on the base layers underneath and make sure they dry out before you get to your camp, so you're not sleeping in wet and cold pants. The shorts that I used were the REI On the Trail running shorts. These shorts are fantastic. They're super comfortable, super lightweight. I think they have a 3-inch inseam, so they're pretty short. And they are meant for running, and they have a nice mesh pocket on the backside where you can slip your phone in, and it won't fall out, which was really nice when I got to trail towns and I didn't want to carry around my bag with me, but I could still keep like my phone with me and stuff, even though it didn't have like traditional pockets. I would totally use these shorts again in the future. They did develop some holes on the inseam of the pant. Now, I wore them every single day for 6 months, so honestly, I'm not upset about that. I'm impressed, in fact, that they lasted the whole time. So I'll be using the same shorts in the future. The shirt that I used was the men's Patagonia Soul Patrol 2 long sleeve shirt. This shirt was fantastic. It had so much ventilation to it and like adjustability. I could button it up if I was cold, and I could like Velcro down the ventilation to not get as much ventilation if it was cold. I could roll up my sleeves, and it had a nice little button to latch your sleeves so they didn't slide down. It was fantastic for all sections of the trail. It ended up wearing down around Northern California and then super bad once I got to Washington. The inseam of the arm started to just deteriorate, and by the time I hit the Canadian border, I just had the wrist seam and then it was ripped all the way down that seam to probably like the middle of my rib cage. It wasn't a tear. I didn't rip it on anything. It just like was natural deterioration. Again, I'm not super mad about it because I wore that shirt every single day for 6 months. So I think that's pretty expected when you put all that wear and tear on one piece of clothing. I like the shirt a lot. I'll probably get another one if I do some more long distance hiking in the future. I did have to pick up a fleece during my through hike because I was super cold in the first couple of weeks of the desert, and I was nervous about what the Sierras had in store, because if they were anything like the first couple of weeks of the desert, I was going to be freezing and potentially miserable. So I ordered the Patagonia R1 Fleece. It's a fantastic piece of clothing. It's got that grid fleece pattern on it, so it's still breathable, but it keeps you super warm. It's got a hood, and it's got the thumb holes in the sleeves, which is awesome. It is a fantastic mid-layer. I would wear that to sleep on cold nights. I would wear it, honestly, most mornings when I was hiking, just because most mornings had a morning chill in it, and you can't really wear puffy when you hike. You just get hot immediately, and then you get cold because you're sweaty and the sweat evaporates. So I found the mid-layer to be a super valuable piece of gear, and I definitely won't be hiking anywhere without that piece anymore. I wish I had started with a mid-layer fleece in the beginning of the trail. So I would definitely recommend people starting with a mid-layer fleece, and the Patagonia R1 works really well. The puffy that I used was the Patagonia Nano Puff jacket. This jacket's awesome. I really like it. It doesn't have a hood, which I think I'm going to want a jacket with a hood going forward, just because some of the cold nights you were hanging out, like eating with your tramley or whatever, I had my beanie on, but I was still getting a lot of breeze, and it would have been nice to have a hood I could put up. I know I could get a balaclava and substitute that way, which is totally a fine option, but I do wish it had a hood. Granted, I have a mummy sleeping bag, so I wouldn't have necessarily used the hood when I got into my tent, but hanging around the campsite, a hood definitely would have been nice. I'm happy with my choice of sticking with a synthetic puffy, just because usually when it's raining, I also tend to be cold, so I like to layer like my rain jacket over my puffy to create a good hard shell but insulated system. And if I had a down jacket, I'd just be worried about it getting wet and then never drying out and being ineffective at keeping me warm, especially if the temperatures dropped at night. So I'm going to stay with a synthetic puffy going forward, but I might look for one with a hood. But the Patagonia Nano Puff is still a fantastic option. The rain jacket that I was using was the North Face Venture 2 jacket. It's definitely not an ultralight jacket. It's a 2.5 layer rain jacket. So it's going to be a little bit heavier than some of the ultralight jackets you'll see in the market, like the Outdoor Research ones. But I mean, there's a reason for that. The Outdoor Research ones tend to not last nearly as long. A lot of people that I met on trail had jackets like those, and they would wet out. So the thing I really liked about the North Face Venture 2 is I never had it wet out. It always was a really reliable hard shell and waterproof layer for me. At the end of the trail, it didn't necessarily wet out, but that's also because we didn't have a lot of rain in Washington. Now that I am back in Portland and I'm wearing my jacket around all the time because it rains here, I find it's starting to wet out a little bit, which again makes sense. I use it every day for 6 months. So I'm just going to pick up some DWR from REI and wash that with it and give it a fresh coat of water repellent. But I'm going to keep using that same jacket in the future, and I highly recommend it. So I started off the trail with a pair of glove liners. They were the Outdoor Research, let me get this right, the Outdoor Research Vigor Heavyweight Sensor Gloves. I think I'm just a person who doesn't work well with gloves, honestly. My hands are always cold, and gloves separate all my fingers, so I feel like they just get even colder. Like, I would find myself, whenever I had my gloves on, pulling my fingers out of the finger sockets and just like balling it up in a fist in the center of the glove. So I ended up sending those gloves home about halfway through the desert, I think. I think I'm just a mitten person, so honestly, I would not be carrying gloves, even like the thin liner gloves, again in the future. I'd probably go for just a mitten if I really needed one. But what I really loved was my waterproof over mitts. They were the REI Goretex over mitts. I had originally planned on putting those over my glove liners, and I think I did a couple times in the beginning when I still had those gloves. But even once I sent those gloves home, anytime it was windy, my hands were cold, or it was raining, I put those over mitts on, and they are 100% waterproof. They do not wet out, they are seam sealed, and they would keep my hands warm by keeping them dry and keeping them out of the wind. So they definitely didn't provide really any insulation at all, but just like keeping them out of the wind and keeping them dry was all that I needed from them. So I'll probably honestly just be using those types of gloves in the future unless I'm doing some more like mountaineering or winter backpacking. In that case, I'll be using the same ski gloves that I used in the Sierras, which I'll be going over in my next video when I talk about all the gear I brought with me up into the high Sierras. I had with me a buff. It was a merino wool lightweight buff. I wouldn't go on a backpacking trip without that. It was great for warmth, for comfort. In the time of COVID, you can use it as a face mask when you get into town. It has a lot of purposes, and I will definitely keep carrying that into the future. I also carried the Patagonia Dickbill cap. You probably saw me wearing that almost every single day on trail as my hair started to get super long and I went like 7 months without a haircut. That hat was really nice to have. The thing that I liked about it was that it didn't have any structure to it. The bill in the front could like flip up and it was really soft, so I could crumple it up and just put it in like my hip belt pocket, and it would unfold easily when I took it out of there. The top of it was also all mesh, so I was able to like still get some ventilation on the top of my head, because especially as like your hair grows out, if you're wearing just a normal baseball hat, it can get really hot up there, and then you can end up with like dry scalp or dandruff. So I think the ventilation really helps with that, and I'll definitely be using that same hat in the future. The beanie that I had was from Headware. It was fine. There's not much to really talk about with a beanie. It was super comfortable and it kept me warm enough. So I'll keep using that for foreseeable hikes. I also had the Sea to Summit head net with me for bugs and mosquitoes, which I was almost ready to send home around Lake Tahoe because I hadn't used it once, and I was like, oh, this is just something that I read online in a blog and it's totally unnecessary for reality. I am so happy I kept it with me because Oregon, especially Summit Lake around like the Diamond Peak drainage area, is the worst thing I've ever experienced. The mosquitoes there were formed like a black cloud that surrounded you. I was in all of my like waterproof gear I could have, my pants, my rain jacket, my waterproof mittens, my head net, and they were still biting me and I still wanted to die. So if you're going anywhere around the melt time, so again, it depends on like where you are, when you are, but whenever that snow melt starts to happen in the shoulder season or in the summer, and those mosquitoes start to hatch and swarm out, if you don't have a head net, you're in a lot of trouble and you are not going to enjoy any aspect of that hike. So I highly recommend having that head net with you, and make sure you do have a hat that has some sort of bill with it. So like I said, my bill was super like short and flexible with my hat, so it probably wasn't the most effective for me at all. If you are going to be doing a lot of mosquito hiking, I recommend getting like a full brim sun hat to really keep them away from your face. Now, I didn't start off the trail with camp shoes because I thought it was unnecessary. I wanted to keep my base weight as low as possible. Turns out once you get on trail, being comfortable is also an important factor. So I picked up just like $1 pair of cheap flip-flops from a Dollar General in one of the desert towns, because getting to camp with wet or frozen shoes, especially when it's cold outside, is horrible to have to hang out in them. It's really nice just to like put on some flip-flops, let your feet breathe a little bit. Even though trail runners are a lot more breathable than hiking boots, again, if they're wet, especially if they're frozen and you're doing like shoulder season hiking, it's not going to be fun to put those on. I remember, I think like around somewhere in the Big Bear Mountains when I was camping on like 10 feet of snow, I had to pee in the middle of the night, and I think I had left my like pee bottle outside my tent, or maybe I had thrown it away in town or something like that. It wasn't available to me, and I had to thaw out my frozen shoes by pouring boiling water on top of them because I literally couldn't fit my feet into them. And this is at like 2 a.m. when it was like 17 degrees outside. I never want to do that again. So not only am I carrying that pee bottle with me all the time now, but camp shoes, really nice benefit if you're hiking through rain or snow. And all of that clothing I kept in an REI 5-liter mesh stuff sack. I like the mesh. It was lightweight and I could easily see what's inside of it, so I could figure out like where items are that I have to retrieve. I just like the visibility of it. I'll keep using that in the future. I like to keep my stuff organized. But that does it for my entire clothing setup. So next up is going to be my electronics. So my first and most important piece of gear that I had with me is this phone that I am currently filming on. It's an iPhone. Yeah, you can bring your phone in the backcountry. It's going to serve a lot of purposes. You can use it as a camera. You can start a vlog with it. I definitely recommend bringing a case. I brought a rubber case with a plastic hard shell for it, but I definitely recommend having a case. Toby, a member of our trail family in Washington, did not have a case on her iPhone, and God bless her, but it gave me so much anxiety to see her on the side of a cliff without a case on that iPhone. So just put a case on your phone. Luckily mine lasted the entire time and I didn't break or lose my phone. So I'll keep bringing it on trail in the future with me because it's a great way to access a lot of the apps that in the modern day and age really help out in the backcountry. So the apps that I use the most on the trail, number one is Guthook. Guthook is probably the main navigational tool for PCT through hikers, and I found it to be super user-friendly and super helpful. So I did carry paper maps when the trail was covered in snow. So for the first desert portion and for the Sierra Nevadas, just because, especially when you can't see the trail, you always want a backup navigation system. So I did carry paper maps and a navigating compass, and I knew how to orient myself with them, which is important, otherwise they are useless. But for the rest of the trail, I just use Guthooks myself. Now, for you, you might not be comfortable doing that, and you might want to carry paper maps. That was the mentality that I had in the beginning too, but either I felt confident enough or foolish enough or a combination of all of that to not carry paper maps on the non-snow covered sections. So be that as it may, I probably would still do that again in the future. Guthook was fantastic because you could read comments about upcoming sections of the trail. So every campsite, every water source, every road crossing, they all had waypoints on the map that were interactive, so you could click on them, you could see a picture of them, you could read a description about them, and then other hikers can comment on them with the date and give you updates on the progress. So for instance, you could see yesterday a hiker commented on a water source that it's still flowing. That's great. Now you know you can probably rely on that water source. So super helpful, and it's a great way for the trail community to help each other out. Something that's important with it before you go, I would recommend downloading the topographical layer and the satellite layer. I found myself sometimes switching back and forth between the two depending on honestly what my purpose was. If I was trying to find like a good campsite, usually the topographical map was a great way for me to kind of like see where flat areas are, and then I would toggle back to the satellite map to see like if it's under tree cover or if it's actually exposed. So I definitely recommend downloading both layers while you have service so that you can use them offline in the backcountry. My main weather app that I used was Weather Underground. I just find it's a really, really accurate app that gives you tons of detail about wind, about temperature, about humidity, precipitation, usable daylight, sunrise, sunset. I think it's just really user-friendly, intuitive, and it packs a lot of information in there. So I'll keep using that into the future myself. One of my favorite apps that I used on trail was Peak Finder. Basically, you like download the libraries when you have service, and then you can use them offline with your GPS, similar to how Guthook works. But you just point your phone at the mountains, and then a silhouette of that mountain range shows up on your phone, like real time as you move it around, and it'll identify all the peaks that you're seeing with the name and how high they are and what state they're in. or country if you're like near one of the borders. And I found it to be honestly a really helpful navigational tool in the Sierra Nevadas when the trail was totally snow covered. Guthook was helpful, but it was also good to know like, hey, I'm heading towards that peak right there, so I could know what it looks like and keep it in mind, because you don't get a good picture for what peaks look like on a topographical map. But this was a great assistance to Guthook, especially in snow-covered areas. And the last app that I would use a lot on trail that I never used in the real world was InciWeb. So this is a fire tracking app that I downloaded in Northern California and I use all the way to Canada. But basically it's going to have a map of America, and it's going to have little fire icons as wildfires spring up during fire season. And you can click on those icons and it'll tell you where the fire is, what percent contained it is, how it started, and then a little description of like the current status of it, so you could know how big of a threat it is, which direction it's going, where the smoke is right now, and it'll also tell you which trails are impacted, so you can be certain to know whether like a portion of the PCT is going to be impacted by a fire, or whether it's even close and threatening the PCT. The headphones that I brought along were just the normal Apple corded headphones with the lightning jack on them. They worked fine. I like those style. They ended up breaking, I think like halfway through the trip, and I had to order another pair, but not a big deal. I was originally thinking about bringing my AirPods, but they're a lot heavier, especially the charging case, and it was just one more thing that I would have to charge. And the Bluetooth between this and my phone drains my phone battery a lot. So I just thought it wasn't worth it for the trail. So if I'm doing short backpacking trips, I'll bring these, but a thru hike, I'll stick with the corded headphones in the future. The power bank that I brought was the Anker PowerCore 20,000 milliamp hour power bank. This thing was great once I figured out how to use it. Make sure if you're going like with a power bank system that you familiarize yourself with all the different types of cords and power delivery systems so that you get the thing that will charge it correctly. So this thing is a power delivery power bank, meaning that it's going to charge like twice as fast as everything else. So I originally started off with an Oakley wall block. It was just a wall block that plugs into an outlet, and it had a USB-C charger on it. And I was trying to charge my power bank with it, and my power bank just like wasn't charging overnight. And I actually mailed it back into Anker in the town of Mount Laguna 3 days into the trail because I thought it was broken, and they sent me a new one to the town of Idlewild. So first off, great customer service. I really appreciate them sending me a new one. But then the new one wasn't charging either, and so I thought that one was broken too. But logically, like, the chances of me getting two broken power banks are really low. So I looked and did some research into the wall block that I was using, and it just like was not the power delivery system. So my power bank actually was charging. It was just charging so slow that even 24 hours wasn't going to visibly charge my power bank at all. So I swapped out and got the Anker Power Port wall block with a USB-C and a USB-A port on it. And that is a power delivery wall block, so it actually charges my Anker in about 6 hours or so. So, love that wall block. Wish I did the research before the trail, but I'll keep using that wall block in the future. And as far as the battery pack goes, I love the battery pack, especially now that I know how it works. It charges my iPhone probably like 9 full times, which is more than I ever use it. And I, vlog on the trail, and I edit my videos every night on the iMovie app in my tent for about like 10 minutes every day, and it's able to support all those needs. So 20,000 milliamp hours I think is probably enough for most people's needs. For my headlamp, I started off the trail with an Eddie Bauer headlamp because it's the headlamp that I had lying around my apartment. It was an 80 lumen headlamp, and I didn't really know what lumens were, so it seemed fine at the time. It was not fine. You can't see anything with 80 lumens, it turns out. And it took 3 AAA batteries, which are heavy, and in the cold, they die immediately, and they're not rechargeable. So in Kennedy Meadows South, I got a better headlamp from Triple Crown Outfitters. I got the Black Diamond Revolt rechargeable headlamp. It's 350 lumens, which is a terrible pun, but night and day difference with 80 lumens. I would definitely recommend no lower than 350 lumens if you're going to be doing any night hiking at all. And a rechargeable headlamp is a really nice perk because I can sync it up with my other electronic system and just charge it off of that battery pack, because again, like I said, I got enough battery out of that pack to charge everything that I have and have some more battery left over still. So I think I'll be retiring that Eddie Bauer headlamp after this trip, and I'll be sticking with this headlamp for now. And maybe in the future I might even want something brighter and go up to like 450 lumens just because I like to be able to see. And I kept all of these electronic items in the Sea to Summit 2-liter dry sack. It worked totally fine for me. By the end of the trail, the seam sealant on the inside was degrading and kind of like flaking off. So it started wetting out the last couple days. Not that it rained much in Washington for me, luckily, but here in Portland, I've used it on a couple day hikes up on Mount Hood, and it did wet out for me. So I'll just have to use the same seam sealant I got to fix up my backpack and use it on that dry sack as well, but then it should be good to go, and I'll keep using the same one. And my last piece of electronic gear is a contender for the most important one. It is my Garmin Mini inReach GPS beacon. So this thing has a hefty price tag, but it is completely worth it in my opinion. In the future, I will not go into the backcountry, especially alone, without it. I used 3 main features on it. So first off, I bought the cheapest subscription plan. It's like $14 a month, I think. It basically gives you like the minimum of everything. So you can use SOS button as much as you need to call search and rescue. And you get 3 preloaded text messages on there that you can send to a couple preloaded contacts. But anything other than that, they're going to charge you a little bit for. Not a big deal. For me, that's the plan that seemed to work the best for me, and I'll keep using that plan in the future. You can download the EarthMate app to your phone so that you can use your Garmin inReach just kind of like as a conduit. So your phone's actually the interface, and this is really just like a conduit between your phone and the Iridium satellite so that you can use it even when you don't have cell signal. But the main resources that I wanted from it was the SOS button, because when I was hiking alone in the backcountry, that is an essential item in my opinion. Even something as simple as like rolling or breaking your ankle can be deadly if you're hiking alone and you're nowhere near civilization or roads. So having that feature alone, even though I never intend on using it ever, is super important, I think, for thru hikers. The other feature that I used every single night is that preloaded text message feature. So I had a preloaded message on there that said, hey, I made camp for the night, everything's all right. And I would just press send whenever I set up camp that night, and I'd go to my parents and to Justin and to my brother, and it would actually include my GPS coordinates and a pin on the map. So I could send that, and every night back home, they could pull up their phones and it'd have a map of the US with the trail on it, and it'd auto-populate a pin every single night where I sent that message home so they could see the progress I was making, see exactly where I camped that night, and know that I was safe. My parents were very appreciative of that, and yours probably will be too, so definitely a good feature. It's cool because you can actually just copy and paste the coordinates into Google Maps in the 3D satellite feature, and you can like literally get like a 3D footage of where you'll be camping that night. So it's funny because every time I'd get to town, I'd get some texts from my dad like commenting on the exact campsites that I was staying in. So it's a nice way to make your family and friends feel like they're really a part of the thru hike as well. And then the last feature that I use, which could be important, is calling for the weather. So when you don't have signal, you can't just check weather underground on your phone. And even when you do have signal, it's not super exact, but you can call weather on your GPS, and it'll get your exact coordinates and use the National Weather Service to give you the most up-to-date weather. And I found it to be almost like scarily reliable, like down to like the minute of when it's going to start raining. So especially if you're doing some mountaineering or like the Sierras and you're about to go over a pass or make a summit, and you're not quite sure about the weather, it's starting to look a little iffy, I definitely recommend having this so you can use a feature like that and call that weather to be certain before you go to higher elevations that you're making the right move. But that is it for the electronics that I was carrying with me on the PCT. And that's going to wrap up this second of 3 videos on my gear that I was carrying with me on my thru hike. So again, if you didn't see my first video in this series, you can check it out up here, but it goes over my cook and sleep systems. And next week, we'll be going over the remainder of my gear, which is my hygiene and my medical kits, my miscellaneous gear, and then the gear that I used in the High Sierras. But until then, thanks for watching and happy trails, everyone.